Hey DC foodies! Tired of guessing where to eat next? Meet Tasty, the app that helps you find the best dishes worth ordering using real receipt data instead of star ratings. See where people actually spend their money, what they order, and what it costs before you go. Whether you're looking for date night, lunch, or pizza nearby, Tasty helps you decide. Download Tasty at jointasty.com and scan your first receipt. That's Tasty with an I.
Today on CityCast DC, in a few weeks, DC is going to see something we haven't seen for 10 or 15 years, which is a trial of an elected official on allegations of corruption. This is embarrassing for any city, and it happens all over the place, but it's especially embarrassing in DC because there are people on the Hill and elsewhere who say we don't even have the right to self-government. But these kinds of trials also tend to give a peek at how insiders behave when they think no one's watching. My colleague Emma Uber covered the preliminary hearing last week, and if that's any indication, it's going to be a pretty entertaining peek that we're going to get. She is here to set the scene. Today is Monday, August 24th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Emma.
Hey, Mike.
Let's, catch folks up. Who is this Trayon White of which you speak, and what's he charged with?
Right. So Trayon White is the Ward 8 council member on the DC Council, and he has been charged with felony bribery. Basically, the FBI alleges that he agreed to accept over $50,000 in cash and agreed to accept over $150,000 in potential future kickbacks in exchange for using his political position to steer contracts towards an anti-violence interruption group.
So this immediately gets us into two things. One is the way the city handled the surge of violence post-COVID. Were they doing the right things? Were they engaging the right people to help with that? And then the other is good government in general. Let's talk about the second of those things first, good government. One of the big pieces of news you reported is that it now turns out that Councilmember White is not going to dispute the fact that he took cash from an FBI informant, which is probably a good thing because it was all caught on camera, like wads and wads of cash. He still maintains his innocence. How does that work legally?
Yeah, so we don't know exactly what the defense will argue, but the pretrial hearing this week kind of gave us a peek. So this week, Trayon White's defense and prosecutors kind of agreed that White would not fight the fact that, he was caught on camera 4 times accepting cash from this nonprofit CEO turned FBI informant. And in exchange, the prosecution wouldn't enter into evidence hundreds of pages of evidence related to Councilmember White's gambling. Now, to be clear, Trayon White is still pleading not guilty, still plans to maintain his innocence. We don't know exactly how that's going to work, but based on arguments during the pretrial hearing, it seems like what's going to happen is Trayon White is going to accept that he took money from this person, but perhaps argue that it was not a quid pro quo arrangement. There wasn't any set favor he had to do in return. And, perhaps this was just someone he had a relationship with in a non-professional, non-bribery way. It seems like that's what they're going to try to say.
So the other thing you reported last week was that his chief of staff, who incidentally is a person who once ran against him, is in hot water for allegedly texting a witness, which caused the judge to instruct the lawyers to admonish Councilmember White because that's inappropriate.
Right. Prosecutors kind of tattle on this chief of staff during the pretrial hearing and said that the chief of staff had texted one of the witnesses. Basically, Trayon White's chief of staff allegedly sent a message to Quelly Sneed and texted her a link to a news article that mentioned that she could be a potential witness for the prosecution and wrote, "Keeping you prayed up." And this, obviously, Snead might be a witness. She's the director of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, which is like the DC agency that oversees a lot of these violence interruption programs. And so, the judge was not happy that someone in White's camp had contacted a potential witness for the prosecution ahead of the trial. The prosecutors tried to paint this as, like potential witness intimidation, things like that. Snead told Jenny Gathright over at Notice that she has not talked to White about his legal thing, and this was about his legal case, and that this was a text to a friend in a personal capacity. But regardless, the judge made it very clear to Trayon White's lawyers that he and anyone in his camp should not be making contact ahead of the trial with any potential witnesses, which, is trial 101.
So if he's not planning to contest that he took the cash, what is I guess from what you said, the prosecution's job is then to demonstrate that it was a quid pro quo? That it wasn't just like they had made a bet on a football game or something?
I mean, the legal case, we still need to see out the legal case that the defense is going to lay out. White in the past has made comments basically alluding to the fact that this was entrapment. He's said repeatedly that he was set up and that the FBI was after him, things like that. So one option is we could see the defense trying to argue that this is a case of FBI entrapment and get the jury's sympathy in that way. The other thing was that during the pretrial hearing, the defense tried to kind of argue that the prosecution had nothing to prove, that this was like a set arrangement, a quid pro quo type thing. So I think those are the two main legal strategies that the defense seems to be gearing up for. I mean, some of the questions that they're planning to ask the jurors in jury selection give us a little bit of insight. And the defense seems to want to question jurors about their thoughts on FBI entrapment, FBI sting operations, things like that.
Meaning that they are looking for people who might come into their job with the ability to be skeptical of the feds, in this case, targeting a Black elected official from the historically sort of most marginalized ward in D.C.
Based on some of the jury questions, that does seem to be the case. And I mean, a lot of people in like Ward 7, Ward 8 seem to be sympathetic to that because obviously, like in DC history, it's not been disqualifying to be arrested by the FBI and have a political resurgence. And, Trayon White has evoked Marion Barry in speeches and stuff before. And so I think that if you find a jury of DC natives who are aware of that history and a little bit more sympathetic to that, a little bit more skeptical of the feds arresting elected officials, maybe that's a good strategy.
Well, and I think just in general, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., I mean, it's not a great time to come in and argue that you're a completely apolitical office at this point, because it's been in the middle of these, unrelated to municipal politics, but it's been in the middle of all these highly political cases that a lot of reasonable people think are targeting enemies of the administration. I suspect Trayon White probably would not make a list of the top 1,000 enemies of the Trump administration, but who knows? Listen, who is the nonprofit CEO turned informant who gave White this money?
Yes, so this is Alu Kamara, as you said, former CEO and president of a violence interruption nonprofit called Life Deeds. But he basically agreed to become an FBI informant. He was facing some of his own charges related to bribery and bank fraud, and to cut a plea deal, agreed to kind of wear a secret camera and record himself handing what prosecutors say is white envelopes stuffed full of cash to Trayon White. And so he has 4 recorded instances of those sort of interactions in the summer of 2024. And those are the instances, that Trayon White has agreed not to contest, which makes sense since they are caught on camera.
So this does get us into sort of the second thing in this case, which is beyond the matter of whether the Ward 8 council member is on the up and up, is how D.C. has addressed violence, particularly how it did in the wake of COVID and the police reforms of 2020. This firm, this nonprofit, Life Deeds, did violence interruption, which is an endeavor that brings people who have been in a the life of violence, who have themselves been involved in violence, maybe been involved in drug dealing, what have you, and who recognize sort of patterns that lead to deadly violence, and to like work with people to interrupt violence, to dissuade violence. By definition, you are going to be getting people, and you're going to be working in organizations led by people who are not like, who don't have like sparkling clean resumes, who have led and they say exited the life. But that has itself been controversial independently of this case, because there's been a lot of questions about the results. Can you sort of get us into like the top line of what that controversy is and what the battle lines are?
Right. I think the context in which this alleged bribery happened is really important, because in 2023, I mean, DC experienced this generational spike in violence, and people, these organizations, victims of crime, the DC government was like desperate to figure something out. And so obviously some people were like pro more policing. Other people were looking for alternative solutions like these violence interruption groups, because it just was such a deadly year in the district. And so the DC government spent, millions of dollars in contracts with these violence interruption groups, basically to deploy these people into neighborhoods where shootings were most common. But that in itself became a massive debate. The DC police union was super against it. They were like, no, the way to prevent violence is hardline policing. A lot of activists were like, no, the way to prevent violence is to be proactive and reach out to these communities ahead of time. And so there was already this tension. And then when Trayon White got arrested, a lot of critics of these sort of programs pointed to his arrest as proof that these are all like a grift. But I will also say a lot of the proponents of these sort of programs have been really critical of White too. And I think feel some sort of resentment because they feel like he gave the other side ammo to say, look, like this doesn't work.
Right. And that the only reason people get contracts is because they bribe a council member.
Right. And I mean, there's also like what Life Deeds was doing with those contracts. I mean, the Washington Post earlier this year published a huge investigation that found the group used more than $400,000 of city contract money to like hire businesses owned by its own employees and their family members. Like we were basically using this money the city was investing to like try to stop this spate of homicides, try to prevent people from being killed to enrich themselves. And like, regardless of if there was bribery, regardless of like what ended up happening, that's a really bad look. Like this I think is especially a pain point because all of this happened at such a scary and painful time for DC.
In DC, something is changing. From 2023 to 2024, fatal opioid overdoses dropped by 33%. That's not a statistic. That's somebody's auntie, sister, father, neighbor, friend who is still here. Now, behind that number is a city that decided to fight back. And the DC Department of Behavioral Health is at the center of it, connecting people to prevention, treatment, and recovery services every single day. So whether you're trying to protect someone you love, find a way through your own battle, or simply understand what your community is going through, Know Your Path DC is here for you. Know your worth, know your alternatives, know your value, know yourself. Take it from me when I tell you recovery is possible. It happens every day in this city for real people. Learn more and find resources at knowyourpathdc.com.
So that gets us into like the third thing, which is that this is so embarrassing for the city. You've got even if it wasn't a bribe, you've got a sitting council member taking wads of money, in a car from a nonprofit CEO who's supposed to be running a nonprofit that helps the most vulnerable people, but somehow has wads of money to toss around. And as you say, it's a bad look at a time when a lot of people were suffering. One of the things that I think is particularly going to make a lot of people in the sort of city establishment, people who themselves have no blemishes on their records, cringe, is that the witness list, because the nature of this trial touches on major policy issues around crime is going to include, some very big shots in city government. Who are some of these folks?
Like I said, there'll be Snead, who's the director of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. There'll be Deputy Mayor Lindsay Appiah, who's in charge of the city's public safety responses altogether. And there's an FBI special agent. There's some other DC government people. And yeah, it'll be an interesting insight into how the DC government makes decisions about who it awards contracts to. And I think it'll pull back the curtain a little bit on some of the DC government operations.
One of the other things that is just causes cringing is Trayon White's own history in the 2 years since this indictment dropped. It's been a lot of delays in the trial, but it dropped. He was reelected to his office because the election was already scheduled. He was then expelled from the D.C. Council. He was then reelected again, where he got less than 30%. There was 3 other candidates. In my experience covering local politics, that's a moment when powerful people, mayors and, big political chiefs can kind of clear the field, can say to if there's 3 candidates running against him, say to 2 of them, get out of the race. We'll take care of you later. And then his 30% would not yield a victory, but that didn't happen. So he then comes back to office. It's just this there's a kind of Keystone Cops quality of it that is going to, I think, be on full display at the trial.
Yeah, I mean, you say that it might cause cringe for some people. Other people see it as kind of a triumph, a story of resilience, a comeback. That's definitely the way he's framed it to a lot of his constituents. But you're right. So the DC Council unanimously voted to kick him off the council, which is actually the first time that that's happened since DC got home rule. He was expelled from the council. Then there was a special election to replace him, and it was a 4-way race. He had 3 opponents, and he won, but with a very slim mandate, which a lot of people beforehand were raising alarm bells that the crowded field would allow him to win, and it did. And, he's been serving on the council since. And I think a lot of people have an eye on what this trial means politically for the DC Council as well. I mean, if he's convicted of a felony as a sitting council member, he gets kicked off the council and is not eligible to be on the council again. However, if he resigns before a potential conviction, he is still eligible to run again to be on the council once again, because convicted felons can serve on the DC Council, just not if you're convicted of the felony while being an active council member.
What does it mean for Louis George? I mean, she's almost certain to be the next mayor of the city. She, during the campaign, and a probably poor choice of words, she reminisced about when she first came on the council and referred to White as a mentor who sort of showed her the ropes of council. She's, as we've talked about last week, she's going to be hiring a police chief. Where is she on violence interruption?
Right. I don't know exactly where she is on violence interruption right now. But she's expressed goals to hire more MPD officers. And, I think that she definitely has not commented on the ongoing legal troubles affecting Trayon White. They definitely have been council allies in the past. However, it seems like the next DC Council is going to have a lot of JLG allies. So I don't know if this is particularly consequential for JLG. Again, they've had a friendly working relationship in the past. He definitely supported her over McDuffie in the mayoral race. I don't think that this will be a huge power shift for JLG on the council, regardless of if he's convicted or not.
And if he is convicted and removed, or even if he just resigns, that means there'd be a special election in Ward 8, his district, where the new mayor would have a chance to put their thumb on the scale and throw support behind somebody, in theory at least.
Right.
Before we bounce, one other cringe thing that we somehow haven't touched on yet that I really want to know about is it came out in the preliminaries that you covered. this question of the feds having like 700 pages of his records from MGM Casino that they have now agreed to not introduce. Do we know anything about those records? What are they? I mean, again, it's not I mean, I guess lots and lots of people gamble, so big deal, but like it's not necessarily a great look again.
Right. Well, we don't know much about those records, and except that Trayon White's team seems to really not want them introduced into court, which as a reporter, of course, just makes me more curious. Yeah. So
Right.
they filed a motion to like get the judge to toss them out when the prosecution first indicated months ago that they were going to introduce these records into evidence. The judge didn't agree with that motion, and so the prosecution cut a deal. Basically, yeah, we won't contest the 4 times that you have caught White on camera accepting money, and you don't put in these gambling records. There's an interesting stipulation within that agreement that, if White at some point during the trial, like, tries to go back and contest any of those 4 points, prosecution can say deals off, here's hundreds of pages of gambling records. So no, we don't, because they're not going to be in evidence at this point. But right, as a reporter, it always piques my interest whenever someone's fighting to keep something out of the courtroom.
So the trial opens September 11th. What are the next steps between now and then, or at that point?
Right. So the next thing that they'll do is send out the jury questionnaire in early September. Then they'll decide what jurors they want to call in for selection, and then jury selection will begin September 11th. Once that starts, or once they select the jurors, the trial is expected to last an additional 2 weeks.
Emma, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.